Hey everyone, welcome back. So today we're going to be reviewing Dead Tales for the Nintendo Switch. Now, Dead Tales, to begin, was released on December 3rd of 2020. Its normal list price is $9.99. However, as of filming of this video on December 8th of 2020, there is a sale going on with the game being sold for 40% off at $5.99. Now, just before we get to the review, just a quick reminder that if you like this video, please don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you aren't already. So, just to get started, at its heart, Dead Tales is a 2D action platformer with RPG elements thrown in. And what's going to really hit you first about this game is it's really one-of-a-kind Lovecraftian Gothic style. Now, in this game, you play a Reaper who is tasked with collecting souls for Death herself. However, early in the game, you start going rogue when you start recovering some of your human memories. At first, you're at ends with Death, but by the end of the game, she's depending on you to save her. Now, we aren't going to go any further in the storyline than that because I don't want to spoil it for you. However, at the same time, just a quick warning, this is not a deep storyline-based game. There's a few cutscenes and a few lines of story here and there, but basically the main premises of this game is gameplay and artistic style. It is not storyline. So first, let's actually get a grasp of the basic mechanics. So number one that you need to know about Dead Tales is all about comboing and positioning against your enemies. So if you want to do yourself a favor, if you do decide to pick up this game, the first thing to learn is to learn how to really master your dash mechanic. Because one of the most original elements of Dead Tales is that you have a dash mechanic that is basically tied to your A button, and it allows you to actually get a slight moment of invincibility and actually pass through your enemies to position behind them. And from there on, you can unleash great combos to do a lot of damage. So this game does have a lot in common with beat 'em ups, but you really have to master positioning early in the game if you want to succeed. Now, combined to that, as I said earlier, you have some RPG elements. So as you go through the game, you're going to collect different items of inventory, basically being able to change your sight, your cap, and your armor. And each of these different weapons are really going to have different effects on the overall gameplay. What's really interesting about Dead Tales is I would say no one singular weapon is overpowered, because rather than getting better weapons, you just have weapons with different impacts on gameplay. So there's no one weapon that is the best overall weapon. You really find yourself switching from stage to stage depending on the situation. And the game actually represents that really well because you can change these elements at any time on the fly, and you can even set up to 5 different sets of armor, meaning that you can fast switch between 5 complete different sets at any moment. You also, on top of that, have different magic spells. Basically, you're going to also be collecting different magic cards throughout the game, which unlock different spells, all the way going from healing to dropping meteorites on your enemies. Now, these spells also can be changed at any time on the fly. The only thing is that if you change spells mid-fight, you will have a refresh timer before you can actually use your new spell to prevent you from abusing by basically constantly dropping magic on your enemies. Now, all this is controlled by a magic bar, and basically it refills automatically during the stages. However, you can also refill it quicker by killing enemies. When you kill enemies, you'll have different orbs that will drop from these enemies, and it'll be randomly divided between soul orbs, which is the game's currency, also extra health orbs, which will basically refill your hearts, and lastly, blue spirit orbs, which will refill your magic meter. Now, the stages themselves are set up as a 2D platformer, with different sections being more focused on combat, while other sections being more focused on platforming. And pretty much at the end of every stage, you're faced with a choice of rewards, which basically gives you a choice generally between extra heart pieces, extra magic pieces, or even different parts of armor, or simply extra soul orbs. Now, if you do choose to collect the heart pieces or the magic pieces, basically it takes you 3 individual pieces to have an increase either to 1 extra heart container or an increase to your magic bar. Now, if you're wondering what all those soul orbs are for, well, basically the map is set up sort of like a modern Mario 3 map with different branching paths bringing you to the different stages. And eventually you'll get to a couple of hub worlds where you'll meet vendors where you can actually spend those soul orbs for, once again, extra heart containers, extra magic containers, or once again, pieces of equipment or new magic spells. Now, if that sounds like a lot, it's because it is. There is pretty deep mechanics in this game. And if you were wondering, you can actually replay each stage over and over again, and you'll be able to pick up the rewards you didn't choose the first time. So if ever you get to a point in the game where you're having trouble progressing, what I could suggest to you is to go and replay the stages you already played, but choosing different power-ups. And eventually you'll get to a power level where you'll be able to continue on with the game. So now that we have a firm grasp on how the game plays out, let's start the critique on the different elements of the game. Now, for details, I think we really have to start with the graphics and visuals of the game, because this is what really sets this game apart. And in my opinion, its graphics and its visuals are probably its strongest point overall. I mean, this is a game where you really see that the artistic presentation is at the forefront. Basically, its Gothic style is one of a kind, because normally Gothic styles are very dark and sinister. In this case, it is in the overall artistic design of the elements, but rather than going dark and sinister, they went overboard with color. Basically, every stage is a new palette of vibrant colors. By the end of this game, you're almost going to surely have a color overload. And if you want to talk about creepy design for enemies, this game has a ton. I mean, these things, although they're in vibrant, lush colors, the designs on these enemies couldn't be any creepier. And basically, all the enemies and your characters as well look like stop animation brought to life. And I love this visual presentation. As much as I loved Cuphead going in the sort of retro 50s cartoon style, well, this one goes in the basically stop animation brought to life style. And it really works just as well for this game as it did for Cuphead. So now that we have the graphics out of the way, let's talk about the controls in this game. Now, the controls are something special because once again, I think they went overall for the feeling that you're in, like I said, a nightmare dream world. Because the controls in the game basically feel sort of loose, and when you jump, you sort of have this floaty jump where you sort of float for a half second before you start dropping. But it really supports the visual style of, like I said, these maquettes brought to life. And it really, by the end of the game, makes you feel like you're playing through a dream world. So overall, although the controls are something that you're really going to be getting used to, and I wouldn't explain them as tight controls, I find that overall in the design of this game, they work very well. And the perfect example of this is that when your enemies are controlling tight and your controls are loose, that's where you really feel that the game is penalizing you and that it's just lazy programming. But in this case, the enemies move in the same sluggish, dreamlike fashion, meaning that you can see that it's an overall artistic choice by the game to have controls this way. And I'm telling you right away, that floaty jump style, it is guaranteed that is voluntary. Because when you get to some of the final stages, you actually need that sort of floaty jump to make it across some of the obstacles. If you didn't have it, some of the platforming sections towards the end of the game actually don't work at all. But I am warning you, at first, it'll take a little bit of time to get used to these controls. But I think if you stick with it and you go for the overall feeling of the game, you'll see why the controls are the way they are. Now I want to touch also on the music in this game, because the music in this game is very atmospheric. And each new zone, so not each stage, because basically the music and the visuals in this game work by zones. Sort of like Mario 3, when you go to a new world, the overall visuals change to support this new part of the world, and the music goes along with it. And it meshes in an excellent way in this game. So the music is another really, really strong part of this game. Now, however, there is one thing I want to talk about the game that is sort of a weaker point. I would say that unfortunately the collision and the hit detection in the game does need a little bit of patching and a little bit of work. Simply because at some points in the game, especially like I said in the platforming heavy sections, there is a mechanic in the game where you sort of grab onto a ledge and pull yourself up. Well, at some points when you jump against the ledge, it's like your character stays stuck against the ledge and the grab mechanic just doesn't work. And he sort of stays floating there for a second or two and then just drops back down. It's not game breaking, but it does get frustrating, especially like I said, towards the end of the game where there's a few more heavy platforming sections. And also the collision detections in some of the battles can become a little bit strenuous because at some times, especially when you're dropping from above the enemies, the game sort of, you can see at some points, doesn't exactly know where the hitbox of the enemy starts and where your hitbox stops. And once again, your character just like stays frozen for a second or two before the game decides if it's a hit or not. And more often than not, you just sort of fall beside the enemy with no hit registering on you or on it. Now, these elements are present, but to me, they aren't game breaking. There were a couple of moments of frustration because I would take a hit and it would be a tougher recovery because of the positioning I would have after a drop attack. But overall, I still managed to finish the game with very, very few deaths and basically with an overall feeling of satisfaction. Now, the length of this game, once again, is going to vary a lot on your level of completion you want to go for. I went for basically trying to play through the game as quickly as possible, at the same time experiencing all the stages. So when there were different branching paths, I played each and every stage in the game. And I still managed to finish the game in about, I would say, 5 to 6 hours of gameplay, which for a $10 game, or in this case on sale at $6, feels just where I would want it to be. And although there's quite a bit of variation between the enemies' stages, I think that if the game became any longer than this, you would feel a certain level of repetition at one point. So I do feel that the length of the game is quite perfect, because if it was any longer, they would have to add in extra mechanics, extra designs to really keep everything fresh. So now that we went through most of the strong and some of the low points of the game, I think we're pretty much ready for the verdict now. And just before I actually give that verdict, if this is the first time on the channel, just to let you know, I don't give a numerical score to my games. I give an overall statement on my suggestion as whether the game is worth buying or not. If you want to see what all those statements are and a little bit more information about basically what they mean, look at the description of the video down below. You'll have them all listed right there. Now, as I give my verdict, I'm going to be honest, I do think Death Tales is going to be a polarizing game. Some people are going to play it and are going to fall in love with it. Some people are going to play it and they're going to hate it. If you're the type of person who doesn't like to deal with voluntarily slippy and floaty mechanics, this is maybe not a platformer for you. But if you're ready to try something new and really go with a game that is based on artistic visuals, I think that Death Tales is going to be a one-of-a-kind game. And that's why, for me, Death Tales is a definite pickup. And this game was actually very close, in my opinion, to becoming a hidden gem. If it wasn't for the sometimes faulty hit detection and the slightly repetitive nature of the overall stage designs, this game could have easily, in my opinion, popped to a hidden gem on the Switch. But for me, if you're a huge fan of 2D platformers, especially of the action variety, and you're ready to try something new, this is an excellent place to place $10. Now, since this is such a polarizing game in my opinion, I really want to know what all of you think. So if any of you have bought Death Tales out there, I really want to hear, did you like the game or did you not like it? And if you did or didn't, let me know why in the comments down below. Now, as I said at the beginning of this video, if you like this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you aren't already. Also, don't forget to hit the notification bell so you know when all my videos come out. And as usual, I hope I'll see all of you in my next video.